Hangout. We've got Dr. Sarah Kirk and Dr. Bill Bogart live from Toronto, and I'm going to hand it off to them to get our Google Hangout going. Here we go.
Hi everyone, this is Sarah Kirk speaking, and as you'll probably all know me as the instructor on the course, and I'm really delighted to have Bill Bogart join me today, Dr. Bill Bogart from the University of Windsor, and Bill is also, well, I'll let him do a little bit of an intro, but he's also written a book called Regulating Obesity. And I had the absolute pleasure of being part of a panel or a plenary session with him this morning. We're actually broadcasting from the Canadian Obesity Summit, and we were part of a panel this morning that was really interesting, talking about weight bias and stigma. So I'll hand it over to Bill to just give you a little intro of himself, and then we'll kick off with some questions.
Hi everyone. As Sarah said, I'm Bill Bogart from the Faculty of Law, University of Windsor. So I come to these issues through the lens of the law. I've been very interested in the regulation of consumption for the last 10 years or so. Gambling, alcohol, tobacco, recreational drugs, and then I came to think about obesity and the regulation of non-nutritious eating on the one hand, and the regulating and promoting of physical exercise on the other. And as I began to look at these issues, I also came to realize that there was another dimension to this in terms of obesity, and that was the stigmatization that is visited upon people who have obesity. And so I then began to look at what law's reaction to that and what it is and what it could be. One of the ways that I approach issues is through looking at the relationship of law to other social, political, and economic forces and basic guidelines for human behavior that we call norms. And I believe it's very important that when we turn to law to intervene in a situation, we harness the appropriate set of norms to bring about social change. And so in terms of obesity, I'm very interested in the work of Sarah and related scholars who are looking at stigma and what it is and what we can do about it, because legal intervention really needs to build upon that work. So when she asked me to be part of this hangout, I jumped at the opportunity.
Great, thank you. So, and I think that whole issue about normalizing obesity is one that I really want to talk about to start off with. We have had a bit of discussion for those of you who are joining from the course. You know, obviously we have some things that we're talking about through the discussion boards, and there has been some discussion about, you know, if we are addressing weight bias, are we also actually normalizing obesity? And so we did talk about this morning on our plenary session, and Bill is extremely articulate on this issue. So I'm going to pass it again back over to him to really sort of, you know, start to unpick some of those issues.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I don't know how articulate I am, but I'll sure try.
Pretty articulate.
I guess to me, you know, we have to ask the question, well, like, what do we mean by normalizing? For me, that means looking at shifting norms away from stigmatization. I go so far as to say oppression of people who are obese, towards acceptance of bodies in various shapes and sizes. Now, as we shift to that acceptance, I also think we absolutely have to put emphasis on promoting healthy eating and more physical exercise. I mean, we are a society that eats too much of bad food, too much of bad food, and live and are too sedentary. And those things I totally accept as very important. That has to be part of the shift. But I think we have to realize that there are going to be some of us who will eat as healthy as they can, will be as physically active as they can, and that will not necessarily lead to sustainable weight loss. And so that then becomes part of the acceptance of a diversity and of shapes and sizes. So I'd ask those who worry about normalization, and if that's what they mean by it, yeah, I think we would be normalizing obesity, but I'm prepared to say that would be a good thing. Mm-hmm. Now, if they mean something else, I hope they'll let us know, and we'll respond.
And following on from that as well, I think the other issue is around, a lot of what the research that I'm doing is around recognizing and understanding obesity as a complex issue, and how we create supportive environments for everyone. So you'll know, again, if you're on the course, that we're using 2 hashtags at the moment. So we're doing a lot of this through Twitter. One of the hashtags is Weight Bias Aware, which is the course one. And then for this particular Google Hangout, we're using obesity is complex. So if you want to send us tweets, do that. So Sherry's monitoring one of those and I'm monitoring the other, and then we can, you can actually have send us comments or questions through that medium, and then we'll bring up as much as we can. And I think just following on from that whole kind of, the issue around normalizing. So some of the other sort of feedback that we've been getting is around, is by actually sort of addressing weight bias, are we are just using those terms, is that weightist? So somebody actually sort of was saying, is it weightist to say weight bias? Is it weightist to use the terms like war on obesity? Well, with the war on obesity, I think we should not be using those mm-hmm. kind of combative terms anyway. Again, one of the things that I think we all have to own as, I'm a health professional by training, is that often, we have been socialized, and the society that we live in, conditions us, if you like, to be weight biased. And part of what we need to be doing is actually recognizing, acknowledging that. So, I'll put my hand up and say, I have used biased language. Bill would do the same, yeah. And because that's what we've kind of been socialized into. So when we use those terms, sometimes we're using them with the best intentions. It might not be the right things to say, but I think one of the things that is important, and I'm going to let Bill continue with this conversation, is it's not so much what you say as how you say it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I mean, whoever asked the question of is a weight bias itself weightist, again, I'd want to know what lies behind this, meaning certainly the folks that I've met at this conference are approaching these issues with enormous good faith, including people who are at this conference who are themselves obese. And I think it's important to acknowledge good faith, open discussions. If somebody's using a term that is objectionable in some way, let's hear about it. Mm-hmm. Let's do something about it. An example I would give you is obese versus fat. There are actually large people who do not want to be called obese. They consider it actually to have become a pejorative, medicalized term that's been kind of foisted upon them. They actually prefer to be referred to as fat in an attempt to kind of reclaim a despised term and convert it to their own use, much like the LGBT community took queer, which was a despised term, and converted it to their own use. Now, you may agree with that, you may disagree with that. There may be large people who say, look, I don't want to be called fat, and then I would respect that. I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. But I'm also going to acknowledge that there is this kind of tension about those terms, and try to be open to what's going on. Let's make like one word term. I do take strong objection to the war on obesity. For a number of reasons. One, as Sarah said, like let's get rid of the combative language. The other is that it's meant to echo. It was meant to echo the war on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if ever there's been a failed proposition, I can tell you it's the war on drugs. My next project is on recreational drugs, and I could go on and on about the failed war on drugs. So, you know, for any number of reasons, that is one term I'd lose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree, and again, I've probably used that term in the previously for the, you know, again for the very good intentions. It's not trying to raise awareness of the issue, and I think there's also nothing wrong with admitting that you have been wrong in the past.
Yeah.
You know, when we're working in this field, and we don't have the lived experience, for example, then, you know, recognizing that you know, I can't always speak for the individuals themselves, and one of the reasons why I've done the research that I've done is around giving voice to those people who perhaps have not had a voice. And one of the things, again, we were talking about this morning in our session is, you know, individuals living with obesity do tend to be quite marginalized. They're not the people who are going to say, hang on a minute, you know, they've been exposed to weight bias and stigma for so long. They've had people, I mean, one of the people on the plenary with us this morning, you know, spoke really, really eloquently about the words, the things, you know, he's an intelligent man. He has a lot to offer society, but people judge him on his weight. They use very pejorative terms to you know, about him, and you know, we have to kind of recognize that you know, people need to have a voice, and often they don't have that. And so when I'm speaking around this issue, I'm speaking from it, you know, as an advocate often, rather than, you know, somebody who has any other kind of, you know, I'm not an expert. I mean, I often kind of feel like, you know.
Well, yes, you are.
You know, I don't know the answers, and I think none of us really do. We you know, we can give our best guess. Sometimes our best guess is wrong. Sometimes our best guess will actually move the things forward, and so, you know, let's go on it, you know, from that position, I guess. So yeah.
Oh well, I was just going to say that I think these are related. I mean, certainly this book I wrote, Regulating Obesity, was a journey for me. If I'm being honest, I think when I started this book, I probably carried with me prejudice towards obese people that are at play in the larger population. And through the research and analysis, I came to really view obesity very, very differently.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is there is a particular sensitivity around obesity. I said my field of engagement is regulation of consumption. Well, when I speak to an audience about alcohol, there may be people who would have issues with alcohol in the audience.
Yeah.
They don't have to acknowledge it. They can pick and choose the time where, if at all, they would talk about it. Same with tobacco, same with gambling. That's not the case with obesity. You know, I think we have to be very careful. Even people who are trying to be very sensitive, you can very easily put obese people under a microscope because it's just there. And you can really be talking to somebody and make an audience and make people who are large suddenly feel very put upon.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've experienced this, but and that's why I particularly welcome the presence of people who are obese at this conference, because they kind of give you permission to talk about the issues, and they acknowledge, and everybody acknowledges that they are obese, and you then try to figure out appropriate ways to talk about this condition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that you know, again, I've kind of had a bit of a, I guess, a little bit of an epiphany over my career as well, from, you know, again, well-meaning dietitian as I was, to sort of recognizing that, you know, when I first, for example, when I first moved to Canada, you know, I came with the intention of, you know, raising the issue of obesity as being a condition that was not being properly managed, that was not being even acknowledged a lot of the time in a, you know, when you go to see your you know, healthcare provider, and so in raising awareness of this being an issue that, you know, the really that people who were living with obesity were not getting good care. They were looking for support, and the study upon which the course is based, was really around, let's say, giving voice to that. But I've also kind of like learned that maybe, we should take the focus away sometimes. And so my research is very much, again, around looking at, okay, we are all exposed to the environment. Some of us succumb to that environment more than others. But just because you don't have a weight problem doesn't mean that you're healthy. And I think so. I'm really kind of pleased that we are getting that sort of more of that dialogue around, the environment in which we're making those choices, as Bill's already sort of stated. Where there's unhealthy food that's very, very or again, sometimes I feel like every word I say, I'm making a value judgment or something, so you're always always second guessing what you're saying. But, the foods that are energy dense, nutrient poor would be perhaps a less value laden kind of term. But our sedentary lifestyle, these things are influencing all of us, absolutely all of us. But, we're not all necessarily, having developing obesity or, gaining excessive weight. I certainly, as I'm aging, do notice that I'm gaining more weight than I was when I was younger. Can't get away with things as easily. So I think we all can acknowledge those things. But I think what we've also got to do is be very, very mindful of the language that we're using. And so sometimes it's not so much what you say, it is the way that you say it. And I think if nothing else, we need to be respectful, we need to be non-judgmental, and we need to acknowledge that sometimes, sometimes it's not easy to do that in the current environment. I think the other sort of part of that is in terms of obese people, to support them in regarding eating as healthy as possible and being physically active, without sending the message, and do this, dear, because that will mean you're going to lose weight. Yes.
As opposed to saying, we support you in this, because these are things that will help your health. But we also understand that this may not lead to sustainable weight loss. And there may be other things that can be done about your weight or need to be done, and those obviously need to be on the table. But it's not writing off obese people by saying, well, you're just going to be obese, so what's the point of spending a lot of time having you eat healthily and being physically active? I mean, those things confer benefits in and of themselves.
And so actually there has just been a tweet coming in around people first language and using people first language, saying people with obesity and not obese people. And again, we had a little conversation about this before we sort of came on air. So just to throw it to you, Bill, again, about what the terms that we use and how we use them. Because I'm assuming what this tweet is basically saying that this is not a, we shouldn't be saying obese people, but saying
people with obesity. Yeah, and I don't know if I've said obese people. If I do, I'm sorry. No, I mean, I think this people first language is important. I think first and foremost, what's most important is a respectful tone. I do think it's possible to say obese people and you're saying it respectfully, and no major harm is done. But I think the other thing is recognize there's going to be controversy around a terminology almost in any event whenever there's social movements. And I could take you back to the LGBT community and their adoption of queer. Right now, 30 years ago, calling anybody queer was highly derogatory. The LGBT community, at least part of the LGBT community, said, no, we actually want to use that term. We want to take a despised term and convert it to our own use. So amongst the people with obesity, there will be people who want to be addressed as fat. And I think you have to be sensitive to that. If that person, people with obesity, doesn't want to be termed fat, then of course you shouldn't do that. But you have to recognize that there's this kind of controversy within the community itself.
And I think that's a really good point as well. So I think that the other thing that that seems to be sort of very challenging to sort of navigate, for me anyway, is this sort of like, where, how do we find that middle ground? So we always seem to be polarized. Always our arguments are polarized. So like, we're normalizing obesity if we address weight bias, rather than sort of actually sort of recognizing that that's not about normalizing. It's about, I mean, again, I tweeted this yesterday, it's about humanizing. It's about actually considering this as something that is, it's a fundamental right of people to be treated with respect, and why should we not be doing that? So I think for me, I think just even having these conversations is important. We'll make mistakes, we'll say the wrong thing, all of us, because it's, as I say, it's very much part of our culture. But actually being able to acknowledge that, hang on a minute, that, I'm sorry, or apologizing, I'm sorry if that, if I offended you, and I think that the individuals themselves, I hope that people do have more opportunity to sort of, have the dialogue as well, and actually sort of, have a voice in this whole thing, because it isn't a voice that's heard very often, and like Bill, the people I've met at this conference have just been fantastic, there's the network itself, the Canadian Obesity Network, is trying really hard with the, weight bias is a particular pillar that they're working on, using person first language is part of what we're trying to do in the conference. It sometimes slips out, and actually, as you say, sometimes people are perfectly, actually are offended if you do use person first. They want to be, the words to be reclaimed. I totally agree with you, Bill, on that one.
Actually, can I give you an example of terminology that's happened? It's happened the last 2 days. So Marty, who spoke at the beginning of our session, was in a session on engaging the
public engagement.
Public engagement. Thank you. And he is, in traditional terminology, morbidly obese. So he said yesterday, I hate that term. I just feel condemned by it. And morbid, like who wouldn't? I get that. So in today's panel, I was discussing an instance where something turned on the person being characterized as morbidly obese. And so I turned to Marty and I said, Marty, you know what the term I'm going to use, and I know you don't like it. And he said, Bill, it's fine. Well, I think in that moment, Marty and I connected, right? Because Marty understood, like, I'm not using that term to offend him. I'm using it because I have to explain a situation in which that term was used, and something turned on that term. And, I just think, as prosaic as this is, it's so much dependent on the term. I'm all for searching for the right terminology, but you have to have that basic respect whenever you use terminology.
And again, I would agree with that. So I'm just sorry, I'm a bit distracted because I'm checking my my Twitter feed. The other thing that has come up as well in a couple of tweets today is around this. Like, what do we do? How do we, and especially in the healthcare sector where I came from, how do we address weight bias? And especially, like, again, physicians, what do we do? How do we work through this and do it in a respectful fashion? And I did tweet back around, for me, it's around addressing, acknowledging that weight bias is an issue. So I think for me, again, awareness is the first step. In any social movement, I believe, in actually sort of, you give, the people who are affected are the ones who need to be engaged in this. They need to be at the center of the debate, and certainly that's what's happened in the summit so far. And they need to be connected with the people who are who are making decisions, so policymakers. And actually, I thank a great colleague of mine, Ted Kyle, who is the director or chief executive or something of the of the obesity.
The animating force.
Yes, that's a better way of describing him. Of the Obesity Action Coalition, which is based in the United States, and he actually has a website called Function Health, which I think is a kind of science, within there, and he actually put out a blog post a few weeks ago, which really talked about the HIV and AIDS movement, and again, sort of what helped to reduce the stigma of HIV and AIDS. And three things that were sort of stated were about again people at the center, connecting with policymakers. Two of the things, I actually can't remember the third off the top of my head, but those sort of things that we need to be trying to do. And I think as long as we're doing that,
I think the conferral of basic human rights,
absolutely,
the LGBT community, right?
Absolutely.
That bringing them, reclaiming them from being the other, right? That these were people that were not deserving of basic human respect and dignity. And I think I mentioned that in my talk this morning. I do see some parallels between what's going on here and the LGBT movement.
I agree. I think so. And so somebody here talks about, I really believe if you eat right and move right, you will weigh right. The challenge becomes what is right, which is, I think, again, is a very interesting question, because what we have as defining as right, I think, is wrong at the moment. Especially, the thin is beautiful. That's what we have to all look like. So I think that's a very interesting. I'm not sure if it's a question or a statement actually, but certainly it's something that what is right. And again, going back to the sort of health at every size principles. We all come in different shapes and sizes. We all have.
Now here I might say something controversial.
Go for it.
Meaning I have spent a fair amount of time reading the health at every size literature. I think there's some enormously positive things about it. I often quote a spokesperson for Health at Every Size. She says, "We're not against weight loss. We're against the pursuit of weight loss." Right? That endless hounding of fat people to lose weight. So I think that's a beautiful encapsulation. I do think there's an element of Health at Every Size, and I don't think this is necessarily even their official policy, but that would suggest that there's absolutely no association between weight and health.
Yes.
And I would wish that were true. I would wish that were true. But I do think that, there are, in terms of obesity, particularly as you get to increased forms of obesity, you do get association with health problems, and those associations have to be carefully studied. They have to be empathetically studied, but they shouldn't be ignored.
Yeah, and I think that's where I have I do have a difficulty around this. I absolutely agree that we have to be respectful of diverse body shapes and sizes, and I think actually, so one of the other tweets that's just come through says, how can we shift the conversation with clients and the public from one of weight to one of health? And I think that's perhaps where we need to go. Normal body weight doesn't equal healthy, and I think absolutely not. So recognizing, and again, the work that I'm doing around the obesogenic environment is it's sort of actually recognizing that we're all exposed to that, we're all impacted by it, and weight has no bearing on our health outcomes. I think actually again Dr. Arya Sharma, who is the director of the Canadian Obesity Network, has done a huge amount of work in addressing this as well through this obesity, the Edmonton Obesity Staging System. those kind of things. We're developing more tools. And again, for the question around, what can physicians do? Well, they can go to Dr. Arya Sharma's blog, and they can download a pocket-sized, guide to using that staging system. So essentially, what that does is it takes it actually considers the sort of like comorbidities that might exist for an individual. So if somebody's, actually hasn't developed any comorbidities, then their risk is actually quite low. And so, trying to sort of stage people according to more than just the weight on the scales takes away some of that kind of, the dilemma around, because you can be fit and fat, or have a higher body weight and be healthy. And you can be thin and be quite unhealthy. And unhealthy, exactly. But what we also need to recognize that sometimes we can't take the health risks out of being at the sort of extreme ends of body weight, but as we couldn't with somebody who's extremely underweight. So whenever you're outside, and again it comes back to the whole issue of normative. What is normative? At the extremes, there may be challenges with that approach, but I think the philosophy, the principles are spot on in terms of that.
And can I just respond to that latest tweet about how do we shift from weight to health, and take this opportunity to plug my book, Regulating Obesity. That is, in fact, a central message of the book. When we invoke law to, tackle junk food, to emphasize mandatory labeling for calories, to subsidize physical activity, we should do that in the name of health, not weight. Because it's going to be very, very difficult to demonstrate that any of these interventions actually lead to sustainable weight loss or even prevent weight gain. And by pursuing those goals, we also risk re-stigmatizing fat people because, we're doing this in the name of weight loss. So if you don't lose weight, then somehow you're not living up to part of the civic bargain, as it were. So I think, on the other hand, most of these interventions can be shown to have some effect on health. So we really should be intervening and using law to promote health, not to address weight.
So I'm just going to, there's a few more. I know Sherry's been monitoring the Obesity is Complex one, but I've actually just pulled it up myself, so just to sort of see what was being said. So, and there's some really great things coming through from you all, so thank you. So yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the tweets is around how do we tread that fine line between addressing the seriousness of obesity and decreasing weight bias and obesity stigma. So hopefully we have kind of just tackled that. Then another one, stigmatization is negative because it creates barriers to existing obesity. That's different than groups that don't want to change. Again, agree. Stop equating health and low weight and obesity and poor health. Absolutely. And we need to acknowledge that there are people with obesity who do eat healthy and exercise. And again, absolutely. And on that point, I just also want to kind of, again, draw attention to those of you who are listening on the Canadian Obesity Network's media bank, media image bank. So, one of the things that we often see when obesity is within the, being discussed in the media is these headless bodies. So the Canadian Obesity Network has actually got a sort of section on their website where they have more positive media images. So, actual, enabling you to actually sort of use. So this is a plea to the media really around, stop doing that and start using images that are actually more reflective of the fact that, individuals living with obesity are being physically active. They are doing healthy things, but they have again, it's that diverse body size.
So can I give you an example of this?
Yeah, sure.
So as you know, I blog for the Huffington Post, usually twice a month. And it's not exclusively about obesity because I'm interested in a variety of consumption. Sometimes it's smoking, sometimes it's alcohol. But when it's obesity, they encourage you to include an image because it apparently
Mm-hmm.
promotes people reading the post, whether it's not or true or not. They
Yeah.
encourage it. So I will go down and they give you ones that are available. And I always try to pick something that's neutral
Yes.
when I'm talking about
Yeah.
obesity. So, for example, if I'm talking about kids and promoting physical exercise, I'll click on an image of a playground.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, the blog appears and this extremely unattractive image
Yeah.
of a child with obesity
Yeah.
is on the blog. And I've talked
It
about
must drive
this.
you crazy.
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly what it does. It drives me crazier.
Yeah. And actually, another tweet is around, you know, BMI. Does it even make sense? Well, no, not on an individual level. And I think again, you know, and I'll hold my hand up. It's something that I have in the past said we should be doing, you know, using a BMI because it's a measure that is easy to do within the healthcare setting. But we also have to recognize that it has limitations, you know, and so again, looking for those measures that we can use that are beyond, you know, the weight on the scales or that you know, that I wouldn't like to say magic number because it's not, but you know, trying to sort of look at other measures of health, and I think we need to do a bit more around that. I mean, again, I'm hoping that as we move on the online course, that we can start to, you know, get some ideas from everybody out there, because I mean, you know, you've all got a wealth of knowledge, and again, going back to the whole thing I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just passionate about it. I want to make a difference. I want to start the, you know, or not even start the conversation because the conversation had already started, but move the conversation on. And I need each and every one of you who's on this course to help with that, because you're also passionate, you also have opinions, and we need to get that out there, and we need to come up with better ways of doing this. So how do we do that, and how do we make that make this conversation more respectful? And again, you know, Bill's plugged his book. Great. I've read his book. I actually took it with me on my holiday.
Well, bless you. Bless you.
How sad am I? But you know, it's a really interesting read, and I think it brings up, you know, for me, a lot of issues that I think we've only just scratched the surface on. You know, there's so much more that we can do.
And you know, I think we have to support people like the people who are obese at this conference,
Yeah.
and that famous incident with the new television journalist.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, in Minnesota, and she was a person who was obese, and she got a lot of snarky tweets and emails all of a sudden about her weight,
Mm-hmm.
and she just took the whole issue on
Yeah.
air.
Yeah.
She was powerful, she was eloquent,
Yeah.
and it turned out she got a lot of public support.
Yeah.
So I think it's absolutely possible to change the conversation, and I think that is happening. There's lots of pushback, including from that academic that I talked about this morning.
Yeah.
It's not just in the media; it's also in the academy. You have some academics that still play off very stereotypical images and depictions of people who are obese.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I hesitate to name them on Google, but or on a Google Hangout, but certainly, you know, that is an issue that I think we need to address. And I think the other thing that's really important with this is, you know, I keep saying that, but this whole, you know, this to me as a woman really you know, resonates with the sort of the feminist movement.
Yes.
And the fact that, you know, we need to do a far better job of speaking up about these things. And I had a great conversation recently with a woman in a senior leadership role who I have a huge amount of respect for. You know, and I said to her, you know, sometimes you know, because you know, I don't want to, you know, people have such even the word feminist actually, I mean, you know, kind of causes a lot of, you know, mixed reactions, and some people kind of feel a little bit, I don't know, sort of don't like that word even, and so, you know, you think, well, how do I say these things? How do I say, you know, that wasn't, you know, and she said, well, you do exactly that. You say that's offensive, or that was, you know, you don't necessarily target the individual, but you just sort of say, you know, I find that comment offensive.
Here's why I have a problem with it.
Yeah, that comment was inappropriate. So you're not actually, again, and I know I do this with my kids. When we're talking about behaviours. It's not not your child who's the problem. It's the behaviour that they're exhibiting. So I think there's a lot we can learn from other things that we just need to kind of transpose onto this issue, so that we do a better job. But we are going to make mistakes. No two ways about it.
I think the other thing is that there is a body of literature that's emerging that is, and it's kind of pushback literature. So it's not like I endorse everything, but I think the latest incarnation that I'm thinking about is Harry Brown's Body of Truth.
Yes.
Which I think everybody should have a read. Yes. You don't have to agree with all parts of it. Yeah. I don't agree with all parts of it. Yeah. But you have Deborah Rody's The Beauty Bias, Anna Kirkland's Fat Rights, Abigail Sagai, What's Wrong with Fat. Those are all interesting books, and from a number of disciplines. And then, of course, your own work, Sarah. People should be reading your work.
Well, by the power of Twitter, hopefully they will be. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of opinions on this, and everybody, has a right to an opinion.
But they don't have a right to their own facts.
Right? Well, true.
Yeah,
true.
No. But I think it's actually challenging some of the very erroneous factual claims about obesity.
No, that's a very good point.
You're entitled to your own opinions. You're not entitled to your own set of facts.
No.
And that phrase applies very much so, I think, in terms of addressing obesity.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think there's the one other thing that I just wanted to sort of mention. So there's how do we best understand what people need? Ask them. Again, I think that is starting to happen, and certainly was the impetus for the work that I've been doing as well, around actually having the people affected being the ones who have the voice. So I don't know whether it's because we're in the bowels of the hotel, but I can't actually load any more on my tweet. So I am gonna pass to you, Sherry, and say, has anything else come in from the last one, which I have, which is 10 minutes ago? Is there anything else that we need to be doing? Because we are actually coming to the point of maybe having to start to wrap up. We've been on air for almost 45 minutes. It's flown by.
Several people have mentioned or asked about the fact that how do we amplify the voice of people with obesity? So they're wondering, like someone said, they're disappointed with the lack of focus on amplifying the voices of people with obesity. So just wondering, this person's asking, how can we do that?
Well, that's a very good question. Well, again, for me, I've been trying to do that through the dramatic presentation, which I think is in next week's course. So the study that we did, the paper that you would have read in last week's module was actually talking to looking at obesity from multiple perspectives, and from that we created a dramatic presentation which actually sort of like tried to capture what was said in a consultation with a healthcare provider and what wasn't said. So it was really trying to sort of show that often the individuals living with obesity do not have a voice, and we as healthcare providers don't necessarily always pick up on the things that they are trying to tell us. Or we don't want to kind of, even go there. So to me, amplifying the voices around, we've taken that on a roadshow across Atlantic Canada until we ran out of money. And I'm saying we because, again, as a lot of what I do is it's not me, it's a team of people. We all work on these issues, and I have some fantastic colleagues at Dow who have been involved in this work. So actually I'm finding Twitter, so I'm only a sort of a Twitter newbie, having
Me
only
too.
really
Me
well,
too.
and the irony of it all is actually I hadn't met Bill until this morning, but he and I have been tweeting and retweeting our stuff, and obviously I have read his book because he very kindly sent me a copy because we were going to be presenting on this plenary together. And so I actually feel like I know him even before I met him, and I think I also feel that with a lot of the people I'm meeting on Twitter. I don't know you all personally, and through the course as well. So, you know, we amplify the voices by all of us being the advocates that they need. Individuals living with obesity need to be part of the conversation, but when that isn't possible, or when they haven't, you know, they don't want to be the voice, then I feel strongly that I be that advocate as well. So Twitter to me has been a really phenomenal way of doing this. And I just want to say, again, as we're sort of coming to wrapping up, you know, thank you to everyone who has been participating in the course. You know, 1,350 people at last count, and I haven't looked for a week because I've been too busy with trying to sort of keep on top of all your discussion and comments and things. You know, but we've had a really overwhelming response to this course, which to me reflects both, that people are interested in doing something about it. But people are also struggling. We don't know what we're doing, and so this is a kind of like, you know, everybody's interested because we want to do something about it. So, you know, each of those people who are on the course are now a voice for this. You know, whatever reasons you decided to be on the course, it's, you know, I don't know what they are, but chances are, because often I end up, you know, and again, I'm sure, Bill, you have the same issue, you know, we end up preaching to the converted, you know, talking to the people who already know that this is a problem and that we need to be doing something about it, rather than actually getting to the general public. And so, you know, each of you be that voice, go out there, support the messages, you know, use evidence. I think that's, again, I sort of finding myself agreeing with Bill on that count. You know, we all have our biases, and that sometimes those biases can be presented as facts, but we need to be going on the evidence, and you know, I will always default to that if I can. You know, I will always hold my hand up if I've, you know, I've made mistakes in the past. I will make them again, I'm sure. Yeah. You know, part of learning and growing in this topic is actually being able to acknowledge those things. And so, yeah, I hope that this has been interesting. I'd say one last kind of like check that there's nothing else that of burning issue before we wrap up, because we're going to get kicked out of the room in a few minutes, I think. So, yeah, anything else, Sherry?
No, nothing else. You've covered a lot of the comments that I've seen, and there's been nothing new come in since
that one. So yeah,
10 minutes ago. Yeah.
So again, thank you, Bill, for spending the time
my pleasure.
With me.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we're going to go and get some lunch now, I think.
Very nutritious lunch too.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Modeling, yeah. So the other, actually just throw that in as well. So the other thing I think is always very important is around, you know, we model. So not only we should model what we, not model as in that sense, you know, kind of the immediate feeling there is like, no, not skinny people, but actually recognizing that, you know, we have to walk the walk in the health professions, and so modeling with our language, modeling with our behaviors, and you know, we will see change. I'm convinced. I'm seeing, even you know, from the last time I was at one of these conferences, I've seen a change in the language. I've seen a change in the approach that's happening. You know, change is a coming. So I think we just have to keep pushing it.
Think Candy Crawley, CNN,
yeah.
Their lead political commentator.
Yeah.
Not a young woman, not a thin woman, but a fabulous political analyst, and so she's where she should be.
Yeah.
And you would never have seen that even 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're moving, you know, we're moving the needle, as it seems to be the latest sort of way of describing these things. And so I'll say thank you to everyone for joining us and participating so wholeheartedly, both in the course and in this Google Hangout, which so far, unless we're talking to ourselves, has actually seemed to have gone okay.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.